Hey guys, welcome to Digit.in, and today we're going to be reviewing the Samsung Galaxy F62. Now this is the second F series smartphone from Samsung, the first one being the Samsung F41 which launched last year. There are quite a few things that are actually quite interesting about this smartphone, and if you're wondering whether the F62 is the right phone for you or not, well, we have the answers. But before we give them to you, make sure to hit the subscribe button on our channel and also hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any future updates from us. With that out of the way, let's begin. First, let's go over the specs. The Samsung Galaxy F62 is powered by the Exynos 9825 SoC. This is a 7nm based chipset, and to some of you this might actually even be familiar. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, well, this is the same SoC that's found in the Samsung Galaxy Note 10. So you've got a flagship SoC in a mid-range phone. So that's point number one. Second thing is the phone comes with 128GB storage as standard, and the RAM variants are 6GB and 8GB. We have the 6GB variant, and for those of you wondering, yes, there is a dedicated microSD card slot in here. Next big thing about the smartphone is its display. It's a big display actually, 6.7 inches, Super AMOLED FHD plus resolution, and no, you don't get a 90Hz refresh rate, and unfortunately there also doesn't seem to be any HDR capabilities, despite the fact that this is actually quite a bright display. Next, you have the 64 megapixel quad camera on the back, which is the primary camera, along with the 12 megapixel ultra wide lens. There is a 5 megapixel macro camera and of course a depth sensor as well. The battery in here is a massive 7000 mAh. Like, it's quite impressive that a phone that is relatively fairly light and this large has a 7000 mAh battery. It supports 25 watt fast charging, and the charger is included in the box. While the on-paper specs of this phone are pretty decent, let's see how they actually translate to real-world performance. Samsung says that the Exynos 9825 can go toe-to-toe and best Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G, their flagship mid-range gaming SoC. So let's see if that's actually true. When it comes to the CPU benchmarks, for example with Antutu and Geekbench single core test, yes, the Samsung Galaxy F62 does come out ahead. However, in the Geekbench 5 multi-core test, the OnePlus Nord, which is powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G, does have a bit of an advantage. Where things get very interesting, however, is the GPU testing. Now, on all of our GPU benchmarks, the Samsung Galaxy F62 comes out ahead of the OnePlus Nord, which means to say that the Mali GPU in this phone is outperforming the Adreno GPU on the OnePlus Nord. That's great. However, when we actually take a look at gaming tests, which is where we use Gamebench to profile multiple games to see what the average FPS is, how stable they run, things are a little different. Okay, now for example, let's take Call of Duty Mobile. Now when we played Call of Duty Mobile on the OnePlus Nord, we got a rock solid 60 FPS with 100% stability on board. But on the Samsung Galaxy F62, our average FPS was 58, but the stability was just 89%. So it is both the numbers, the FPS and the stability is lower than the OnePlus Nord. Similarly, even for Asphalt 9, while the peak average FPS was a good 30 FPS on both the smartphones, the stability was lower on the Samsung Galaxy F62 at 91%, whereas the Nord had once again 100% stability. So overall, in terms of its performance, as a gaming device, it's pretty good, no doubt about it. The Samsung Galaxy Note 10, for example, which had the same SoC, was also a great performer. But of course, with this one, we've got not just a great SoC, but also faster RAM, better cooling, etc. Does it outperform the 765G? Yes and no. In benchmarks, several of them, yes. In real world usage, it just about meets that benchmark that the 765G has set. But if you leave gaming aside and if you move on to things like just, handling emails, using apps, taking a lot of photos and videos, Honestly, this mid-range smartphone does not disappoint at all. There is very little stutter. The only time it's actually noticeable is when you boot up the phone and try to launch something right after. But once the phone sort of settles in to the daily grind, it does not slow down, it does not stutter. I've had no crashes on this smartphone in my time using it. So overall, it's been a fairly consistent and reliable experience, and definitely not frustrating at all. After the performance, let's talk about the battery life, because that's another really big feature of this phone. With a 7000 mAh battery on board, trying to drain this phone was quite frankly a pain. The phone lasted about 2 days of usage, not 2 full heavy use days, but almost 2 days. And that's actually very impressive when you consider the fact that this is a 6.7-inch display. It's pretty massive, and my usage involved watching plenty of YouTube videos, listening to a lot of music, and of course also exchanging quite a few messages with people who are wishing me well, since I've actually been unwell for the last 10 days. But besides that, the battery on this is definitely something that will attract you. If you need a phone that will not disappoint in terms of its battery life, if you are somebody who travels a lot, I know it's COVID, but people have started moving around any which ways. If you do a lot of excursions, the battery life on this phone is definitely something that will make you want to take a look at it, because not only can you, for example, have the GPS on for 7 hours straight while you navigate your interstate trip, but if you're somebody who does a lot of on-site work, which basically means that you're not in the office, you don't have access to electrical points all that often, 7000 mAh is super duper reliable. The other thing is the phone supports 25-watt fast charging. It's not the fastest out there, and frankly the phone does take quite a long time, almost 2.5 hours to charge back up fully, a little over 2.5 actually. But the decent thing is that Samsung includes a 25-watt fast charger in the box, which is like, it sort of baffles me that in today's times we're talking about what brands are including chargers and what are not. So any which way, you do get a charger, you get a compatible cable, so you don't have to worry about those things. My suggestion would be, once the phone's battery hits about 30% or below, and it's night, just plug it into charge overnight and you should be good to go for the next 2 days. After the battery comes the display. Now this super gorgeous 6.7-inch Super AMOLED panel has a resolution of FHD+, so that's 2400 by 1080, and quite frankly, it's a very signature Samsung panel. It's got these nice, bright, vibrant colors. It's actually quite a bright display as well, clocking at a 560 nits on this thing. It's super bright, which means you have no problems reading this screen in bright daylight. And honestly, this feels really nice. It's nice that Samsung has ditched the curved thing for the display and gone with a flat panel, because you can put it down. And that's really good. The one gripe that I do have with this display is the fact that it does not support HDR content playback. Now, as of testing this phone, neither Netflix HDR nor YouTube HDR videos would play back on this phone properly. Netflix does not stream onto this phone using the HDR standard, and when you play back HDR videos from YouTube, they sort of go back and forth between the SDR and HDR state, despite being on a stable internet connection, and the colors just don't look right. So HDR content playback is very poor, which leads me to believe that this does not have HDR support. It's something that we reached out to Samsung for, but we still haven't heard back from them on the state of this thing. But other than that, the display is really good. If you're going to be watching movies on this thing, you're actually going to enjoy it quite a bit. Next, let's talk about the cameras. Now on the back, you get a primary 64 megapixel sensor, which is pretty great. And if you're taking photos from this thing and it's automatically shooting in the bin mode, you can essentially expect a couple of things. First, everything's going to happen really fast. The focus is fast, it's reliable, taking shots is quick. There's very little time between shots, so that means you can just go tap 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 tap. It'll keep taking. Of course, that taps out at about 7 or 8 shots, then it slows down a little bit. And if you actually look at the images, they're pretty amazing because you get sharp, good quality images with decent dynamic range, nice HDR tone mapping, and overall just a very pleasing image to look at. There are, however, some small niggles. For example, the camera is still not the best at handling backlit subjects. Like, it can shoot them fine, but the dynamic range when you're dealing with a backlit subject on this camera particularly is not the very best out there. You still get a usable image, mind you, and if you do manage to edit it, you can still salvage it, but as is, it's not something you'd want to put on social media. The 12 megapixel ultra wide camera on here is okay at best. Here's why. It lacks autofocus, which is honestly a little disappointing because Samsung is one of the very few brands that provides autofocus on an ultra wide camera. It would appear that Samsung wants to keep that just for its premium lineup, but would have been nice to have it on here. It would have really set this phone apart. The image quality from the ultra wide lens is also not the best. You see quite a bit of distortion around the edges, and there's also purple fringing when you're shooting in high contrast situations, which is basically if you go outdoors and you shoot any landscape images, if there's a tree or a bunched up set of leaves, branches, etc., you will see purple fringing around them as well. It is a little bit of a hit or miss, to be very honest. It's not the best lens out there, but it is something that you could use. And with a little bit of clever editing, you could get away with by posting it on social media once again. Definitely not print worthy, but definitely social media okay. The macro camera, on the other hand, again, and I have to say this again, if a macro camera does not have autofocus, does not have image stabilization, it should not be on a smartphone, period. Because this macro lens allows you to get anywhere between 3 to 5 centimeters of the subject, and when you're that close, even the slightest of wind can cause the focus to shift. Even the slightest of breathing on your part will move the focus so much that you may not think it's much, but your shot will be completely out of focus. Secondly, when you're trying to frame your photograph, if it's something up high or something down low, like I actually struggled to shoot a bee in the flowers the other day, it's almost impossible to tell if your shot is in focus or not. But if there was autofocus, you would know it is. Or if there was image stabilization, I would know that, okay, I can shoot at awkward angles without getting camera shake in my photos. It took almost 15 tries, so there are 15 non-usable photos for one good one. And that's a track record that pretty much any macro camera on a smartphone has. It's just poor implementation, and I would wish that brands would either improve it or just do away with it completely and give users something that's actually a little more usable. Now, in terms of low light, now here's the interesting thing. The night mode is available on both the ultra wide and the primary lens, but you don't want to use it on the ultra wide lens. It's just, you'll see so much noise in the edges. There's practically no detail in the shadows. Everything just looks sort of smudged together. But if you do use the primary camera, which is the 64 megapixel camera, and between the binning and the multi-frame technology that's on here, the results are still very good. It's a nice brightly lit frame, especially when you're shooting at night. That's like a wow factor, and it does take a few seconds to get the shot, and there is a possibility that if you move a little bit, your shot may not turn out right. So word to the wise, if you're using this in night mode, just hold it stable for a few seconds, let it do its thing, and then you can move. The results are actually pretty good, so I'm not going to fault Samsung for this one thing, because had they put image stabilization on here, it would have been better, but you know, it's fine. Last but not the least, let's talk about the design of the Samsung Galaxy F62. For anybody wondering, yes, this is a plastic bag, or what Samsung calls glastic, but it has a fairly interesting finish. This is what Samsung calls the laser blue colored variant, where you have this gradient going from blue to gray, and you've got these vertical lines etched into the back. I kind of like it. It's not like my absolute favorite. It's not the design that makes me go wow. I do know people who liked it, and I also know people who didn't. So this is going to be purely personal preference. There's also a green color, and I am more partial to green as a color. I would have probably liked that more, but that's just personal preference. Second thing that's really nice is that the camera bump doesn't actually exude too much out of the body. So it's not flush, but it's very minimal, so you don't actually have a wobble when you put it on the table. The other thing is that all of your main controls are on the right side of the frame. You've got your power button, which also doubles up as the fingerprint sensor, which is absolutely amazing. Like, side mounted fingerprint sensors are so much easier to use and so much more reliable than in display fingerprint sensors. It's just, I honestly wish we see this in flagship phones as well. The volume button is just above that, and the button quality is pretty good, and the up and down presses are quite distinct, so they don't feel very mushy. Last but not the least, I have to talk about this. The SIM tray offers you dual SIM compatibility, and it also offers a micro SD card slot. And what's very interesting is that over the last few months that we've been trying out phones, so be it the Mi 10i, the Oppo Reno 5 Pro 5G, what did we review recently? The Realme X7 Pro, the X7, all of them had a rubber ring around its SIM tray. This one doesn't, which alludes to me to the fact that this phone has no IP rating. And given that the SIM tray does not even have a rubber ring around it, I would definitely keep this away from any kind of splashes, just to be safe. Then let's just move to the bottom, where you have a USB Type-C port along with a headphone jack, which is pretty amazing. You get a headphone jack with this. I personally really like it. And on the other side, you have a single mono speaker. So single and mono, same thing, but yeah, the earpiece does not double up to give you that stereo effect, just to be very clear. So the sound is one-sided. And that pretty much wraps up all of the details around the Samsung Galaxy F62. So let's conclude this review of the Samsung Galaxy F62. For a starting price of 23,999, this phone is going straight up against the OnePlus Nord, which is a benchmark in this price segment, no doubt. With that said, there are a few advantages that this phone offers over the Nord. For example, its battery life is incredible. This display is definitely amazing, even though it's not a high refresh rate display. It's very bright, it's very legible. The performance on this phone goes toe to toe with that of the Nord, but the Nord takes the cake when it comes to the UI experience with its near stock Android-like feel. But with the F62, you also get Samsung Pay, which is pretty amazing, especially if you're just dealing with NFC-based payments. So there is a case to be made for somebody to consider the Samsung Galaxy F62. If you need a phone with reliable performance, incredible battery life, a good display, a headphone jack, and of course, dual SIM with micro SD card slot, and not to mention the ability to pay using your smartphone, then the Samsung Galaxy F62 fits all of those boxes very well. The one area where it does falter is the software experience, which Samsung's One UI may not be for everybody's liking, and of course the very weak sound coming out of the single speaker on board the smartphone. For the price though, it does make a compelling case for itself and is definitely a phone that you should consider looking at before you pull the trigger on your final choice. So thank you guys for watching this video, and in case you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section below and I'll try and get back to them as soon as I can personally. Thank you for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one. But before you leave, make sure to hit the subscribe button on our channel, and of course also hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any future updates from us. Thank you for watching.